the tuna. Did I mention the tuna? Hi, and welcome to Acorn Knits. My name's Natalia. I'm a knitter based in Sydney, Australia, and if this is your first time joining, this is pretty much my little nook on the internet where I like to talk about all things knitting. And for any returning viewers, hi, thank you for dropping by again. As I've mentioned several times, I am perhaps the most inconsistent social media user ever. So I apologize about the really long delays between videos. And I've never said this before, but perhaps consider subscribing to the channel so that you don't miss anything. Because I'm not publishing on a regular basis, it just means that you won't miss if I do upload a video. I think let's just get into works in progress and finished objects. Actually, with that said, it's really mostly a finished object heavy video. Because it's been a while since I last uploaded, I haven't shared anything that I've been working on. And so much of what I was working on, I showed off in my last video, which was a roundup of everything I knit in 2022. So the first thing that I finished in 2023 was the Boardwalk Blouse. I've knit a few of the Poison Grrls patterns. Actually, that's not true, I've only knit one. I knit the Boardwalk Blouse, but I've knit a few iterations of it. I showed that in my 2021 video. I'll put some footage in here. But what I finished here was the Boardwalk Blouse. And the Boardwalk Blouse is knit in fingering weight yarn on, I'll have to check which millimeter needles. And it was a really quick knit for me. It took, I think, 3 weeks. There's a few different versions of it. So I did mine with the folded over mock neck, and I did 3/4 sleeves, and I did it very cropped, right at the natural waist, with quite a lot of waist decreases. I feel like that's really my thing when it comes to sweaters, is a lot of waist shaping, really, really rapid decreasing. I like them very, very fitted and generally cropped, because mostly I'm wearing them with high-waisted jeans. Occasionally I'll put them over dresses too, and I think that suits it best. I know some people really rock that sort of oversized, tucked into jeans, very French chic kind of aesthetic. That's not really my thing. I think it's amazing. I just can't pull it off. Anyway, so back to the pattern. It is set in shoulders. You use, so you pick up around the armholes, you use short rows to shape the sleeve cap and then just continue knitting in the round. For this one, I knit it with Bendigo Woolen Mills Tranquility, which is a blend of wool, silk and nylon. And interestingly, I mean, all my knits are always covered in cat fur, no matter what I do, no matter how much I lint roll it, because I have 2 fluffy ragdolls, their fur is just like in the atmosphere at all times. I hate to think how much of their fur I've probably ingested over the time that they've been in our lives. But if you look past the cat fur, there's certain parts like here where there's these little white splotches. And they're actually the silk content of this, I think, where it hasn't quite taken on the dye. But I would notice that a few times, that as I'd be knitting, there'd be these sort of white flecks that ran through the yarn. And I just picked them out when I was feeling like it. But that is one little thing I thought was a little, maybe a little annoying, because it does make it look like it's sort of lintier than it actually is. But with that said, the yarn is beautiful. I have not yet blocked this, so I'll be interested to see how it blocks out, if there's much stretch in it at all, because it is a superwash, and there's that little bit of silk in it. I've used this yarn before. I used it with my Priscilla cardigan by Marjana Kowalczyk, and that didn't really grow very much, but that was paired with a mohair, and that kind of prevents superwash yarn from, you know, growing too much, because the mohair really doesn't have, not that the mohair doesn't have any give, but the silk core really doesn't have any give, so it's nice in the ability to hold superwash in and stop it from stretching out too much. But my thoughts of the pattern. I loved it. Poison Grrls, all their patterns are really well written, very, very easy to follow, beautiful designs. It is that very sort of 80s does 50s kind of aesthetic, so it is that more sort of rockabilly style. But I think still very wearable. Obviously, I've seen some people do theirs in much more bold choices, and they rock that. That looks amazing. But you can just use them for quite simple classic pieces, and that's what I really like about them. So yeah, highly recommend. I think I started to touch on it before, but I didn't go into it, is that there are a few different versions. So you can do it with a mock neck, you can do it with a crew neck, you can do it with a super high turtleneck, you can do short sleeves, 3/4, long sleeves. You have an option for very cropped, moderately cropped, long. So the pattern is maybe a little bit more than what you'd normally pay for a sweater pattern. I think from memory, I think it ended up costing me about 20 Australian dollars, but we had a pretty poor exchange rate at the time. I think the pattern goes for between 12, I think it's around about 12 US dollars, which is maybe a little bit more than most patterns. I find generally on Ravelry, they're usually between 6 and 8 US dollars, so it usually works out to be about 10 Australian dollars I would normally pay for a pattern. But I think it's worth it because I really love her designs and would highly recommend this one. Now the next object isn't really a finished object, but it's so close, I'll pretty much count it as that. So I'm knitting the Vair pullover by Gudrun Johnston, and you can buy this online from Ravelry. However, I don't believe you can buy the pattern individually. You have to buy it within a series from the Shetland Trader Volume 3. I was able to buy this book in person, and the price ended up working out to be a little bit more than if I had just bought it digitally, and I think it's nice to have a physical copy of something. The only thing is if I'm knitting on the go, I can't really bring this with me. It's quite large and I don't want it to get crushed in a bag or anything. So I did find when I don't have a digital pattern, it is a little bit, you forget how kind of inconvenient it is if you just need to look something up. So what I would tend to do is if I was, taking this to work to knit and I was getting up to a section where I'd need to change technique or there would be a difference in the instructions, I'd just take a photo of the written instructions and just look at it on my phone. And that worked out fine. And I think it's worth it to have the physical copy. And the colors I chose were pretty inspired from the cover photo. I think in the photo, it doesn't look like a jet black, which is what I liked, but it actually is a black. And black is not really my color. Love it, looks amazing on people. I am not one of those people that it looks great on. And especially when you have two fluffy white cats, black kind of is a difficult color to have in your life. So sometimes I wonder if part of my avoidance of wearing black is just based mostly around the cats. It's not true, I don't think it suits me, but it doesn't help having two white fluffy cats. But you can see here a little closer up of that cover photo. And they also have lighter options available too for a bit of inspiration, which I thought were really beautiful as well. I think they've got a few more of those, if I can show you. Yeah, so there's options as well where you don't need to do the color work along the body, and then showing off that lighter version too. Really, really stunning. There we go, and just a final one of there. So you can see here the model's got it as a crew neck in that beautiful lighter version. Whereas the model here has it in the really high turtleneck. So I fell in love with this when I first saw this pattern, which came out a couple of years ago, but I was put off by the fact that I wasn't able to just buy the pattern individually. I think after a certain amount of time, she does release them as individual patterns, but I think when it's close to the book release date, she encourages people to buy, or creates the option that people buy it in a group bulk matter. Anyway, I didn't mention, so this is by Gudrun Johnston. I've knit one of her patterns before, the Belmont cardigan, which as soon as I saw, I also fell in love with. I first saw it on Wool and Vine's channel, on Kristen's channel, and she did hers in the Tuku wool ōSHen colorway, which is sort of like this gorgeous purpley mauve. It was stunning. I fell in love, I bought the pattern immediately, and I also bought the same yarn because I was just so sold. I bought it in a different color, I bought it in the Mantu colorway. I show that pattern in my 2021 knitting roundup, so I'll put some footage of what that looks like. But interestingly, I had an issue with that pattern that I also experienced with this pattern. And it's really curious. So with the Belmont, when I knit it, as I said, I knit it in Tuku wool in their fingering weight. And the pattern recommends Jamieson Smith 2-ply jumper weight. I believe it's that one, because that's what it uses for the Shetland Trader as well. I'm sorry, for the Vair pullover also uses the Jamieson Smith 2-ply jumper weight. So when I knit the Belmont, I had so much issue getting gauge. I'll put some footage up of how it was coming out at, and I couldn't understand it. I used the same needle size, and I'm a pretty tight knitter. I'm not like, I've gotten better. I think I've learned to loosen my tension. So now I sort of knit up, I feel like I'm probably considered like an average tension that maybe would lean slightly tight, whereas before it was like strangling the yarn.
Lisa, no! Your hands are too weak!
And despite that, when I knit up this pattern, it was huge. The gauge was really loose, and I think I ended up having to size down several needle sizes. I will put what the original needle size was here and what I had to size down here. It was a big difference. And I just assumed, okay, it's the tuku wool. There's something funny about that and how it's knitting up. It's just knitting up at a much looser gauge. And interestingly, Kristen had the same issue when she knit her Belmont. She also had to size down needles quite a bit to hit gauge. So I assumed we both used the same yarn. It's a yarn issue. That's that. So when it came to knitting the Vair, I thought, that's it. I'm not going to take any risks with it. I'm going to knit with the recommended yarn. And there is hundreds of colors to choose from. I mean, maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, but there is a lot of colors to choose from. And there's 2 places in Australia that stocked it. And when I was looking at their online photos, the same image of the same, or rather, the same colorway was taken by 2 different photos. I'm having trouble explaining this.
That you want.
So I would look at a colorway, let's say a blue, a light blue, and I'd look at it on one website and it looked really, really vibrant, and I'd look at it on another website and it looked quite muted. And I didn't know which one was the accurate photo. So I ended up convincing my boyfriend to go on a road trip to a small town that was a few hours drive from Sydney, and it's called Convent Chapel. It is an amazing store. They have everything online, so you can buy online from them, but if you do have the opportunity to pop in, if you're somewhat based around Sydney, or if you just don't mind traveling a long way, I would highly recommend it. The store owner was absolutely lovely. They have an incredible range. It's like a great range between very rustic kind of natural yarns and then really cool hand-dyed superwash. So I feel like you kind of get a bit of each. I think because it's owned by 2 women, they both have quite different tastes in yarn, and as a result, you get this amazing range. So Convent Chapel, highly, highly recommend. Stunning store in Rylstone. Anyway, so because of that, we drove out. I was able to pick out my colors in person. So these are the contrast colors that I went with. There is the coral, so beautiful, oh my lord. Then this amazing burnt orange. Heathered, absolutely stunning. It's sort of got that yellow, orange and reds running through it. Then we've got just a pretty standard light blue. It's coming up a little bit more vibrant and darker on screen than it actually is. And then finally, classic Ecru. They did also have a white, but it was almost like an optic white. It was just a little too intense, so I went with this sort of creamy Ecru. And I think altogether, if I also show the main color, that was my palette. I think it's really beautiful. I liked working sort of with contrasting colors. So if you look on a color wheel, orange is sort of at the other end of opposite to blue, but I didn't want that really obvious blue and orange, so which is sort of why I threw the coral in, because there is orangey tones to it without it being super in your face orange. I will put the color codes below because, as I mentioned, they have so many colors in this range and it's a little overwhelming. It helps a lot when you can go there in person. Like, I was just picking balls out and holding them together and just making little color palettes, and that's how I ended up with these. But going back to my original issue, which I feel like I've gotten a lot of deviations with this, so thank you for bearing with me. But when I knit this up, it knit up at a really loose gauge again, and I couldn't understand it. I had to size down several needle sizes and it was still knitting up too big. I'll put some footage in to show you how it was coming out. And I was doing really, really rapid waist decreasing once again to try and, you know, cinch it in, get it to fit, and it still just wasn't happening. And I'd knit a decent way up the body before I thought, you know what, I'm not going to continue. I don't like how this is fitting. It's a pretty decently involved project. It's not I mean, once again, I'm a small human. It's not a huge project, so ripping out that much wasn't too distressing. But I ended up having to size down 40 stitches from what I cast on, and I cast on the smallest size available. 40 stitches is a huge amount to have to reduce it by. So for reference, each of these razor shells is 10 stitches. So I had to take it in by a lot. And thankfully, one of the cool ways that the color work is done is that because this is natural yarn, you can split splice, and that's what she recommends doing. So I ended up just unraveling it and creating this cool ball that kind of reminds me a little bit of the Zauer ball, I think by Shopperville. So I might just knit up a little swatch with this, but essentially I had a big ball of it that was all of the body, and I would just knit the color until I had enough of it, and then I would cut it and then unravel it a little bit more till I got to the next color change, split slice, keep knitting. And so this is the leftovers that I had from that, because obviously originally it was a lot bigger. And I should mention this is bottom up, so that's why I started with the color work. So it comes up this way. I did a lot of waist shaping on it too. I believe I ended up reducing it by, was it another 40 stitches? Yeah, it was 20 stitches either side. So it was a pretty big alteration to make. And interestingly, the pattern does come with waist shaping, but in order to keep in pattern, you can see she has this column here between the razor shell patterning, and you just reduce that and then increase out. But because I was doing such dramatic waist shaping, it would mean that I'd need a huge panel at the side for that, and I really didn't want to just have a plain panel of it not being in pattern. So instead what I did was I kept the entire thing in pattern. And then you can see here, I'll show it in the try on as well so you can see it a bit better, but I just decreased down to here and then increased out. It was a little bit tricky to keep it in pattern with I think I found the decreasing wasn't too bad, but increasing it out was a little challenging because it's a lace pattern, there's yarn overs, there's knit two togethers, and to try and keep the stitch count consistent while also increasing, and it was a little funky. I feel like I sort of fudged it and managed to get through it okay, but that was a little challenging. And once again, because I had reduced my original cast on by so many stitches, I had to alter the pattern a lot. So when it would come to certain repeats, things like this, about placement of it, I had to do a lot of math. This is the most intense project that has required adjustments that I've ever done. I feel like it's kind of given me an idea of not gauge patterns, grade patterns. I feel like I've sort of had a bit of an understanding of how to do that. If I could do it from scratch, that would be far more challenging. It was easier to look at the increments in the different sizes and then work back from there. Because I believe between each size, there was 20 stitch difference. So because I had knit 40 stitches less, I just had to sort of grade it for 2 sizes smaller. Which there was a couple of times where I almost made some boo-boos, but it was really fun to do, actually, to have to do all the maths again and work it out. And I feel pretty proud that I was able to do it and not end up with something that's a total mess. So the reason why I say this is an almost finished object is that all I've got left is the collar. And I'm still working out what height do I want. Do I want that super, super high, like neck collar, neck brace, turtleneck, or do I want a sort of mock neck? I'm kind of leaning towards more of a mock neck. At the moment, it's sort of getting there. It's past crew length, I would say. So that's all I'm trying to work out. But I did balloon sleeves on it, these incredible balloon sleeves. They also have options just for straight sleeves as well, but I like the drama of it. I think it is a stunning pattern. Aside from the issue I had with the gauge, which is a little disappointing. However, when I looked at Ravelry, no one else seemed to have that issue. So this is what I wonder, is that as a tight knitter, I don't understand how I'm not hitting gauge, and yet others are, who I would imagine would be average to perhaps even loose. It's odd. I wonder if anyone else has had this issue with Gudrun Johnston patterns. I would love to hear.
I feel like I'm taking crazy pills!
But it's a stunning pattern. Her Belmont is stunning. They are beautiful. There's a lot of patterns in the Shetland Trader that I also want to knit as well, so I'm not put off by it because her patterns are so beautiful. If they weren't so beautiful, I may feel a little bit more discouraged. As I've got this on, I've also realized I didn't even talk about the steeking aspect of this. So you knit this pretty much as a tube, and you have steeks here that you'll need to cut open, but also the neck is steeked as well, not just not like in the Arnie and Carlos set of style sweater where I actually cut away at it, but you join in the round and there's like a little bit beneath here where you've cast it off, but then it's very funny. It's an odd looking shape before you steek the neck. It really sucks everything in because you do some decreases while still having that steeking column. This wool is also fantastic to steek, as was the Ralma yarn that I used for the set of style sweater. However, this time I didn't use my sewing machine to reinforce the steek. I actually did a crocheted reinforcement, which I think has its pros and its cons. I like that it kind of seals the edges, which you don't really get when you use your sewing machine. However, it's obviously more time consuming. It also doesn't seal doesn't secure the floats down. I feel a little bit silly with this hanging off, but the crocheted reinforcement doesn't secure all your floats down, whereas the machine, using a sewing machine, does, and I really much prefer that. So I'll show you what the steek looks like in some cutaways. I used a totally different color just so I could really distinguish it. I think it would ultimately just come down to personal preference. For me, I'm always going to use a sewing machine. Oh my god, the tuna. Did I mention the tuna? So yes, this is steeked. It will require it. However, I think this is a really good yarn to be steeking with. It's rustic and it doesn't really want to unravel. I don't think this is an overly intimidating pattern to steek either. So that's just an FYI. I didn't mention that at all, which is such a major oversight of mine. But anyway, so you don't have to do color work on the bottom of it here. You can just do that in the main color, but I think that's pretty cute with it. Obviously with the contrast colors, the color work I think is really lovely. That's my Vair pullover. I wouldn't say it's cropped. I mean, it does sort of sit at the hip. Usually my sweaters are like cropped to, here. But I love the trimming on it. I think that is so beautiful. Sorry I got that in the way. It's still finishing the collar. Would love to know what you think. If you think, is that good enough? Like, is that height good? Or maybe make it a little taller. Would really welcome any feedback. That'd be cool. Yeah, so anyway, that's my Vair pullover by Gudrun Johnston. Stunning pattern. Issue with the gauge. Please tell me I'm not alone. I feel crazy. My other finished object is kind of a half object. So I've got a sock here. And these are the Mercury socks by Kim Mackenzie, who I believe is Matilda Wormwood on Ravelry. They're a free pattern, love it. I was just looking for something that I could knit on the go because the Vair is quite large. It was getting a little bulky to carry around when I was knitting on my way to work. So I went with these lace socks. Really beautiful pattern, very simple. And I knit it with a 48 stitch cast on. Very small feet. 48 stitch cast on 2mm needles, and I think they're beautiful. It's just a really lovely pattern. The yarn I'm using is the Regia. Is it Regia or Regia? I think it's Regia. Any German speakers, please let me know. That would be great to know if I'm pronouncing it correctly or not. But it's the Regia cashmere sock yarn. It's something that I had left over from the socks that I knit for my boyfriend, the upper socks, which I'll insert footage of, which, by the way, if you're hearing a little pitter-pattering around, the cats have had tuna and they get very hyper when they've had tuna. But, so that's what that is. So I finished that sock. I made it a little bit longer than I normally would. Normally I don't make them this long, but I feel like I'm always disappointed in the length whenever I've knit socks, so I thought I'll knit it a little bit longer. And then I have cast on the second one on 9mm needles. Sometimes I find, I don't know if anyone else finds this, but for the short 9-inch circulars, I think I said 9mm, sorry, 9-inch circulars, I find that they strain my hands. I can't knit for as long on this as I can with long needles, like just regular length needles, but I find the magic loop method just too fiddly and I lose motivation very quickly. So I find these are the best option for me. So yes, that is my work in progress. Or, I was gonna say, is it HFO? No, it's just a hoe, half object. That's my half object. And then the final thing I'll talk about is acquisition. So what's on my radar next? So last year I did a test knit for ōSHen Knits, who's Vanessa Fleming, and that was for the mohair intentions cardigan. Super, super cute. I'll put some footage of that one in. But I have had my eye on several of her patterns for a really long time, and she very generously gifted all her test knitters a very generous gift voucher to use at her store, and I used it to buy all the patterns that I've had in my queue that I've just, for whatever reason, never taken the plunge to buy. And the one in particular that originally captured my heart was her Made You Look top. It's a summer top, it's made out of cotton, it is stunning. So beautiful, I love all her patterns. I just think she is an amazing designer, and I wish that more people knew her name because they're so unique. All her designs are incredible, and they're really cool and really trendy, and I think they also really flatter the female form. And I just think there's some designers out there that aren't really groundbreaking, and people love them regardless, and that's fine. But I think when somebody is able to create something so distinctive and so unique, they deserve kudos. ōSHen Knits, check her out. Anyway, as I mentioned, the Made You Look top is made from cotton, and one of the recommended yarns is Blue Sky Fibers worsted organic cotton. So I picked this up from a local store in Australia. It's called Eco Yarns, I'm pretty sure. I believe they're based in Victoria. And I sort of thought, oh, cotton's cotton. I could just buy something that I can grab from a local store. But I really wanted to use a recommended yarn because I don't want to mess about with yarn substitutions and getting a product that I wasn't expecting. And this was a little bit more expensive than other cottons, once again, because it is organic, and it is so worth the money. This is the softest cotton I have ever felt. Like it feels like silk. It feels absolutely incredible. It is the softest ply. It's like a cloud. So you get 100 grams, it's worsted weight, and there's all the stats for it. Made in Peru, it's just glorious. I can't wait to cast this on. I will now. In the Southern Hemisphere, we're in the tail end of summer. Well, we're technically just in autumn, but the other day we had a 39-degree day, and that's by the coastline. I can't imagine what it's like for people who are living further inland. It would have been just inhospitable. And so it's still quite hot. So I think a summer knit is still very much called for. And it's worsted. I believe it's knit on 5 to 6mm needles, so it'll be a quick knit. And I'm sure the next time we chat, it'll be a finished object. So I do feel a little bit bad about the fact that these videos are so sporadic, because as a result, it feels like there's no build up, there's no suspense. It's just all of a sudden, hey, here's a finished garment. I think it's really nice to be able to see people's process with knitting it. So I will try and endeavor to publish more regularly. I'm really sorry. And with all those things, that's everything that I've been knitting on since the start of the year. On my last video with the knitting roundup, somebody asked if I had Ravelry, which I do have, but I've been really bad with updating it. But she really spurred me to publish my projects on there and be a little bit more active, which I really appreciate. Thank you so much for kind of giving me that motivation. So I'll link my Ravelry below. I'll also link my Instagram. I'm horrendous at doing any sort of regular updates, but if you want to catch me, I'll be there at some point. But in the meantime, I'm also going to be releasing some videos of my travels to Europe last year and what I did in each of those cities. That was something that I was planning to do, and things just got really hectic last year. It's difficult when you're balancing a few different hobbies. So knitting is one of my greatest passions, but I'm also really love surfing too. And then between filming videos and editing, a lot of these are very time consuming, and unfortunately I've had to prioritize some things, which mean filming has kind of taken a little bit of a backseat. So I'm gonna try and be a little bit more, try and prioritize it a little bit more. So thank you for bearing with me, and I will speak with you soon, whatever that may mean. Thanks so much. Speak to you later. Bye.